had a chance to like read him and follow him and understand, but I don't think that way and I don't talk that way. So Stacy and I tried to distill what makes something a natural right in a language that most people can understand. So we kind of created this 3 rules that make it a right test. So the first one is, if it's a natural right, it exists pre-government. It's not something that the government can deem or bestow on you. It's something that pre-existed the government, but they exist to protect. Number 2, it's not something that anybody has to provide for you. So if you have to dig it up from the ground, bottle it, package it, ship it, and put it on the shelf, you might need it. Your life might even depend on consuming it. But it's not necessarily a natural right. It's a commodity. And number 3, a natural right is something that is given in equal measure, something that everybody has equal access to. So, for example, a GED or a PhD, right? It can vary in terms of its degree. So education is not a natural right. Mar-a-Lago versus a dorm room, they can vary in terms of distribution. So it's not a natural right. Housing is not a natural right. You can advocate that they're really important, that the government should even subsidize it, but don't call it a right. But if you look at things like, how many life do you get, Jan? How many life do you have? Yes. I also have one, right? How many parents do you have? How many people created you?
Yeah, 2.
Same. Okay, so you can discern a natural right by seeing that it's given an equal distribution, the ability to speak, the ability to defend yourself. You can look at these fundamental natural rights and say, everybody has the same measure. So when you look at the 3 rules that make it a right test, right, nobody provides it for you, it exists pre-government, and you all have the same measure, you can see that children not only have a right to life, they have a right to the 2 people responsible for their existence.
I think, and I'm inclined to agree with you, right?
I'll ensure you do by the end of the interview.
I can see you're going to be very convincing. Just to me, it feels complicated, and I know you work in this space of surrogacy and so forth, right? But Katie, one quick sec. We're going to take a break, folks. We're going to be right back. For us, an author of the book by the same name. Like, I think people would argue, like, for example, just because I took some sperm from a sperm bank to have a child, that doesn't mean that sperm is a person, right? That's just sort of some help I'm getting, for example. Like, I think this is how people think about it today.
Yeah.
Right?
The sperm is not a person. The person that results from that sperm has rights. And when we look at the surveys and the studies of children created through donor sperm, which is really bought and sold sperm, over 80% of them want to meet or know the person that gave them life. They don't consider that just genetic material. They would say, that's my biological father. Why? Because it is their biological father. And there's something that the 2 people who made the child give to the child that even sweet, loving, social parents can't give them. No contract is going to be able to fill that gap, right? Even a social father will not be able to provide everything to the child that they may want to know from their biological father. So this is a natural right. It's non-substitutable. It's inflexible. And the problem is that's a wrecking ball for pretty much everybody. Single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile. Everybody's going to have to conform to that fundamental child right. And that just means adults have to do hard things on behalf of kids. We have been offloading the hard onto children in just about every sector, whether you're talking about no-fault divorce, where the adults refuse to do hard things on behalf of the child, and instead they burden the child with lifelong loss.
Okay, again, you'll have to break that down for me. Why no fault?
Let's hit the high level, right?
Right.
In terms of no-fault divorce, instead of the adults working it out, they saddle the child with split homes, split lives, and in 50% of cases, split personalities, because the child literally has to become a different person on the drive from dad's house to mom's house. For those that are dealing with infertility, if they choose to solve that through a donor, what they're doing is they're saying, our desire to be pregnant is more important than the child's right to be known and loved by their mother or father. I just tweeted a couple days ago a story of 2 men who said, we didn't want to do the adoption route because we really wanted a child who was biologically related to us, right? So they recognize that it's important for them to have a biologically related child, but the cost is the child losing a relationship with their biological mother, right? Somebody's going to do the hard thing in all these situations. It will either be the adults in their struggling marriage dealing with infertility, with their same-sex attraction, or it will be the children. And for the longest time, we have said, hey, kids, you do the hard thing on our behalf. And kids have allowed it because they can't fight back. They don't write books. They don't do interviews. They can't lobby. They can't file amicus briefs. They have to deal with whatever it is the adults decide they have to live with. And for a long time, we have said, your development, your needs, your safety are going to be the price for us to live as we please.
Let's talk about no-fault divorce, because I don't even really understand how it works now. I know a little bit about how family court is often kind of weaponized for the benefit of lawyers.
Sure.
I've done a number of episodes on that. It's actually pretty shocking. What is no-fault divorce? How is that different from how it used to work? Why is it a problem?
Yeah. So there's always been reasons to exit a marriage. Both civil law and religious law would make accommodations and say it makes sense for this marriage to end right now because of, what religious authorities would call extreme cruelty, which we would say is abuse. Abandonment, adultery have always been reasons for religious authorities to say this marriage can end. We've had something similar in the civil world where typically you could file for a divorce if the other party was at fault. Right? They were at fault of breaking their marriage vows. And what typically were the faults that were recognized? Adultery, addiction, abuse, abandonment. So they really have forsaken their promise. And as a result, the innocent spouse could then divorce them and receive reward. Social reward, social support, maybe alimony, maybe custody, maybe keeping the family home. And what did the at-fault divorce system do? It incentivized good behavior. Because if you
became a kind of a pariah if you
Yeah.
were the one at fault.
and
right?
maybe had to
And
pay a lot of
deserved it,
money.
Right.
Yeah. So starting in 1969, when Reagan was governor of California, he was the first person to pass a no-fault divorce law because he himself had been in a situation where he wanted to exit a marriage, but nobody had been at fault. So typically what those adults would have to do is lie and say, well, she committed adultery or he's been abusing me. And they're like, well, that's not really fair, is it? Because I don't want to demonize my spouse and say that he's an adulterer. We just really feel like this chapter of our lives is over and we'd like to move on. So as go almost all overhauls of the social fabric, it was smuggled in under what sound like empathetic, justifiable situations. But the result was a massive spike in the divorce rate. So that the kids that grew up in the 80s and the 90s, some of them had more parents with divorced friends than married friends. And when you make the exit so easy, a lot of adults are going to take it because marriage is hard. My husband and I have been married 28 years, and we just had our anniversary, and I was like, hey, help me put together our anniversary post. And I said, what's the hardest part of our marriage so far? And he's like, 2017, 2018. And I was like, that's right. I call those the warring years, where we just fought a lot. And the only time that we weren't fighting is when we were playing cribbage or rummy, and that was it. And so everybody goes through those hard seasons. And when there's an easy exit, sometimes you take it. Now, the problem with that is children are harmed by divorce. We can measure it in terms of their physical bodies, their emotional health, their academic performance, and their own future relationships. That when a child's parents divorce, it is going to impact all of those areas of their life. There was a study done in 2017 that studied the telomeres. That's the end caps of the chromosomes of children that are responsible for health and longevity. Children who lost their father to death, incarceration, or divorce had shorter telomeres. So they were sicker in the future. They had more chronic illnesses when they grew up. They had a shorter lifespan. Divorce impacts a child's physical body. It also means they are much more hesitant to form their own relationships in the future. They have lower marriage rates. The ones that do get married have higher rates of divorce themselves. You can see it in their test scores. Children whose parents divorced have lower test scores. They're less likely to graduate. There was a massive study using CDC data of 5 million children last summer that came out that showed that there's a 35 to 55% increased risk of early death in children whose parents divorce. Divorce is an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, that often leads to other ACEs. So we were way too casual about divorce. We barely blinked, but a whole generation of children are paying for it. And from the legal perspective, that was the original redefinition of marriage. Marriage historically has had three characteristics: permanence, complementarity, and monogamy. It was supposed to last till death do you part. It was supposed to involve husband and wife, and it was supposed to forsake all others. No-fault divorce did away with permanence and said, this really isn't about an institution good for kids. This is just a vehicle of adult fulfillment. When you stop being happy, it can stop being a marriage. Well, same-sex couples said, well, if this just is a vehicle of adult happiness, if it's not an institution, if it doesn't have to do with kids, being married to somebody of the same sex is what makes me happy. So on that grounds, on that ground and others, we passed same-sex marriage. And now polygamists are gunning for the same thing. Because if marriage is really just a vehicle of adult fulfillment, if it's just about adults being happy, a lot of adults are really happy being in a relationship with 3 other people. So we're slowly deconstructing this critical institution for kids, and it began with no-fault divorce.
You know, in a world where, you know, the birth rate is before replacement in this country, it seems difficult to argue against IVF because, you know, people are wanting to have their own children. So explain to me what you think about IVF, how you came to these conclusions, and how that comports with, you know, this harsh reality we're in.
Yeah. The reason why I am one of the most vocal critics of IVF is because it victimizes children. It victimizes children on 3 different levels. First, it violates their right to life. Only 2 to 3% of lab-made babies are going to be born alive. Probably 90% are going to be frozen or discarded or donated to research and never transferred to the womb. So we mass produce embryos in the world of big fertility so that we can screen out the undesirables. It's a eugenics project, and it violates children's right to life, and it deserves to be critiqued. The second reason why IVF is a problem is because up to 2/3 of the children created through IVF will also lose their mother or father in the process. So if you are one of the 2 to 3% that make it through the eugenics gauntlet alive, and you're not selectively reduced, you are going to lose your mother or father because somebody used an egg or sperm donor in the process. So it violates children's right to be known and loved by their mother and father. And then the purchasing of sperm or egg or the renting of a womb violates children's right to be born free and not bought and sold. What is it that you are paying for when you purchase egg or you purchase sperm? You are paying the genetic mother or father to stay out of the child's life forever. You are paying them to relinquish their parental rights. Now, in the world of adoption, when I was working at the adoption agency, the bright line between adoption and baby buying is that money never went from the adoptive parents to the birth parents. We spent a lot of money in our adoption. Most adoptive parents do, but it's not to buy the baby. It is to get people to come into your home, to fingerprint you, to look at how you parent your other children, and see, is this going to be a safe placement for a child? Because the adults raising the baby are unrelated, and therefore we know they pose a significant risk to the child. So the purpose of spending money in adoption is vetting, not paying somebody to hand over their child. But in the world of big fertility, that's what you're doing. When you pay somebody to be your commercial surrogate, you are paying her to promise to relinquish her rights, not after birth, but probably in the 2nd or 3rd trimester. So that's why I'm a critic of IVF.
I guess you're really saying put the responsibility back on the parents. Don't sort of send it down to the kids.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I am saying in all these situations that admittedly are hard. Those road bumps in marriage are hard. Experiencing same-sex attraction and wanting to form a family or be parents is hard. Being a 40-year-old single woman who would be an amazing mother and hasn't gotten married yet and desperately wants to be pregnant is hard. None of that justifies forcing a child to sacrifice for you. Somebody is going to do the hard thing in each of those scenarios. And it should not be the child. It should be the adults.
Well, Katie Faust, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
It's really good to chat with you.
Thank you all for joining Katie Faust and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellek.